Malcolm Holloway didn't believe in loose ends. That was the first thing Grant ever learned from his uncle. Sitting in the leather chair across from Malcolm's desk at age 14, watching the older man fold a single sheet of paper in half, then again, then slide it into an envelope without sealing it. Loose ends, Malcolm had said, are just problems that haven't finished growing yet. Grant remembered that lesson every day of his adult life. He remembered it standing on the sidewalk outside a baby supply store on a Tuesday afternoon in March, his fiancée's hand resting lightly in the crook of his arm, while somewhere inside that store, a dead woman was comparing diaper prices. If you've ever watched someone's face change, not shift, not flinch, but actually change, the way a person's expression collapses inward when something they believed completely turns out to be a lie, then. You know what Monica Langford saw that afternoon. She had been talking, something about the wedding invitations. The final count, whether to trim the list from 340 down to an even 300, whether that would offend the Beaumont cousins who hadn't responded. Grant wasn't listening. His eyes had stopped on the glass window of the store they were passing, and everything else, Monica's voice, the street noise, the early March wind off the river, had gone completely silent. Inside the store, a woman stood in the baby section. She was holding a newborn onesie in one hand and a package of diapers in the other, and she was looking at the price tags with the concentrated, careful attention of someone counting every dollar. She put the onesie back, picked it up again, set it down, kept the diapers, added a single bottle to the small basket hanging from her arm. 7 months pregnant, maybe more. Moving slowly, the way women do when the weight has become something they carry in their bones. Grant knew her face. He had memorized her face 5 months ago, when the death certificate landed on his desk with her name printed across the top in clean black ink. Jolene Vey, deceased. He had stared at it for a long time. He hadn't cried. Grant Holloway didn't cry at paperwork. He had folded the certificate carefully, placed it in the second drawer of his desk, and told himself that some things simply end before they're finished, and a man in his position couldn't afford to be broken by the ones that did. He had believed it. He had spent 5 months believing it. And now Jolene Vey, who was supposed to be dead and buried, was standing 15 feet away from him through a pane of glass, checking the price on a bottle of infant formula. The moment she looked up, Grant understood she had known he was there for at least 30 seconds before she acknowledged it. That was the first thing that told him she hadn't disappeared by accident. She met his eyes through the glass. 3 seconds. Maybe 4. No fear, no panic, no mouth falling open in shock. She looked at him the way a person looks at something they've already decided how to handle. Measured. Quiet. Already past the part where feelings were useful. Then she turned, paid for her items at the counter with cash. Grant caught that detail, the deliberateness of 6 of it, and walked through the back of the store and out through a rear exit he hadn't known existed. Gone. Just like that. Monica said his name twice before he heard her. Grant. He turned. Her face was doing something complicated, working through what his expression must have looked like during those 4 seconds, trying to land on an explanation that made sense. Do you know her? Monica asked. The honest answer was that he wasn't sure he knew anything at all anymore. No, he said. It was the first lie he told that day. It was not the last. He dropped Monica at her father's house with an excuse about a meeting that didn't exist and drove straight back to the Holloway building on Drayton Street. The private headquarters that most of Savannah didn't know was anything other than an import consulting firm. His office was on the 4th floor, corner room. The kind of room that had been designed to make every visitor feel slightly smaller than they actually were. Lower chairs, slightly elevated desk, lighting that favored the person behind the desk and no one in front of it. Grant had always appreciated the architecture of power. Tonight it irritated him. He pulled the second drawer open and took out the death certificate. Jolene Vey, he read every line. The attending physician's signature, Dr. Silas Rook, MD, the date, 5 months ago, October 14th. The listed cause of death, acute cardiac event, which had struck him as strange even at the time, because Jolene was 27 years old and had never had a heart condition in her life. He had asked about it once. Malcolm had said that tragedies didn't wait for convenient explanations, and sometimes the young died without warning, and they needed to honor her memory and move forward. Grant had accepted that. He placed the certificate on his desk and looked at it for a long time. Then he picked up the phone. I need you to run a records check, he said when his head of operations answered. Medical records, every hospital within 60 miles of Savannah. Patient name Jolene Vey, October. Any admission, any record, any trace. There was a pause on the other end. Tonight? Right now, Grant said. I'll be here. The results came back before midnight. He already knew what they would say before he read them. Knew it somewhere in the part of his mind that had been calculating since the moment he saw her, through that glass running numbers, assembling fragments, feeling the shape of something before it was fully visible. There was no record of Jolene Vey being admitted to any hospital in the region. Not in October, not ever. No patient record, no discharge summary. No death record filed with the county, no billing code. No nursing notes. The death certificate on his desk had been signed by a physician, stamped with a hospital seal, and submitted through proper channels. But the hospital had no memory of her, because she had never been there. Grant set the papers down on his desk. He sat with that for a while. Not the anger would come later, and when it came, it would be the cold kind, the kind that lasted and did damage. Right now it was something quieter than anger, more fundamental. The feeling of a floor giving way beneath you, very slowly, and understanding that everything you thought has been hollow the whole time. Someone inside his own family had manufactured a death, had put a name on a certificate and signed a doctor's signature and submitted it through channels that existed specifically because they were trusted, and had done it deliberately, knowing exactly what it would do to Grant when that envelope arrived on his desk. He thought about the October afternoon when Malcolm had walked into his office with the envelope. The way his uncle had set it on the desk without a word and waited, hands clasped in front of him, patient and measured. "She's gone, son," Malcolm had said. "I'm sorry." Grant closed his eyes. He opened them. He picked up the phone again. "Get me Silas Rook," he said. "And Father Elias. I want them at dinner tomorrow. Tell them it's routine." The dinner was at the Holloway estate, in the private dining room that overlooked the garden. The table seated 12, but Grant had it set for 4, which was its own kind of message if you knew how to read rooms. Rook arrived first. He was a compact, careful man in his 60s, with a face that had learned long ago not to offer anything for free. He was a physician who had served the Holloway family for 22 years. He had treated Grant's father through his final illness. He knew where most of the family's medical information lived, and he understood that information was currency. Father Elias arrived 11 minutes later in his collar, which Grant had always found slightly theatrical, given that Elias's relationship with organized religion was more professional than spiritual. He was a family associate who had handled certain sensitive matters over the years, the kind that required discretion, documentation, and someone who operated outside the usual legal structures. They sat down. The food was good. Grant had made sure of it. When you wanted to observe someone, you fed them well and asked them nothing threatening, and then you waited for the moments they forgot to be careful. They talked about the wedding, about the Langford family and the alliance it represented, about the spring weather and a construction project along the river. Then Grant mentioned, almost incidentally, that he had begun reviewing family records, medical files, financial histories, legal documentation going back a decade. "Just housekeeping," he said pleasantly, "getting ahead of things before the wedding." He watched them both. Rook picked up his wine glass, set it back down. The glass hit the table harder than intended. Not a slam, nothing dramatic. Just that fraction of extra force that comes when a hand suddenly isn't as steady as the brain thought it was. Elias reached up and adjusted his glasses. His glasses had not moved. They were sitting exactly where they'd been. His hand found them anyway, that automatic gesture people make when they need something to do with their hands and their body betrays the need before they can stop it. Grant almost didn't catch it. He caught it. Neither man said anything incriminating. They were too practiced for that. But for half a second, the kind of half second that most people miss because they're thinking about their response, instead of watching, Rook and Elias looked at each other. Not at Grant, at each other. It was the look of two people who have shared a secret for long enough that they've stopped consciously guarding it until something reminds them that they should be. Grant excused himself to pour more wine. Standing at the sidebar with his back to the table, he said nothing and felt the shape of the room rearrange itself around him. Rook, Elias, and above them someone with enough authority and enough access to orchestrate the whole thing from a distance. He already knew who. He had known, on some level, since he'd read the physician's name on the death certificate and realized he had never once questioned it. The next 3 days, Grant didn't sleep much. He didn't let anyone see that. Sleep deprivation in men like Grant Holloway looked like efficiency, sharper sentences, shorter patience, faster decisions. Nobody in the building marked it as anything other than him running at full speed. What he was actually doing was thinking. He was thinking about Jolene. Not as a problem, not as a complication, as a person. Which was something he had failed, repeatedly, to do while she was in his life, and which was apparently something his conscience had decided to enforce now that he was standing in the wreckage of everything he'd done wrong. He had met her 3 years ago at an event she was helping cater, not a guest, a worker, carrying trays, wearing a uniform that didn't fit her right because the catering company had hired her last minute and hadn't had her size. She'd knocked a glass of champagne into the sleeve of a man's jacket and apologized so precisely and without a single excess word that Grant had stopped what he was doing and watched her handle it. She was a seamstress. She worked out of a small apartment and took in alterations and repairs, occasionally picking up catering shifts when the rent came due fast. She didn't pretend to be impressed by things that were supposed to impress her. She made her own decisions. She held her own money and her own silence with equal care. They had been careful, or tried to be, which mostly meant that Grant was the one who'd been careless, and Jolene was the one who paid for it. She had told him, about a month before she disappeared, that she needed to talk to him about something important. He had been busy. He had delayed the conversation twice. She had stopped calling. He had told himself she'd moved on, which said something about how much of her actual life he'd been paying attention to. Now she was 7 months pregnant, alive, buying diapers with cash in a store on the far side of Savannah, and someone had convinced her grandmother to sign papers declaring her dead. He needed to find her, which meant he needed to find someone who might actually know where she was. Calder Wynn had been driving for the Holloway family for 19 years. He was 61 years old, built like someone who had once been much larger and had gradually reduced himself through economy of movement and word. He drove without conversation, knew every road in and around Savannah, and had the particular silence of a man who had seen a great deal, and made a private arrangement with himself about what he was going to carry and what he was going to put down. Grant found him in the garage, checking the tire pressure on the second car. He waited until the man straightened up. "I know she's alive," Grant said. "Give me the address." Calder looked at him, not the look of someone deciding whether to lie. The look of someone who had been waiting for this conversation and had already decided what they were going to say when it arrived. He reached into his breast pocket, took out a folded piece of paper, set it on the hood of the car. Then he picked up his pressure gauge and walked to the next tire. Grant unfolded the paper, an address. East side of Savannah, out where the streets got quieter and the houses got smaller, and nobody who lived in Grant's world had any business being. He looked at Calder's back. "How long have you known?" "Long enough," Calder said, without turning around. Grant folded the paper and put it in his pocket and left. The house had a faded blue door. That was the thing he noticed first, not the weather-beaten siding or the small porch or the garden that had gone mostly to seed in the winter cold. The door was blue the way something is blue, after it has been painted blue many times over many years, each coat fading into the one beneath it until the color was less a decision and more an accumulation. An old woman answered his knock. She was 78, maybe older, with arthritis-twisted hands that held the door frame for support, and eyes that had the particular quality of someone who has lived long enough to be past being fooled by the way people carry themselves. She looked at Grant for a long moment. "I know who you are," Jolene Vey said. "You'd better come in." She moved slowly through the small front room. The house smelled like old wood and dried flowers, and something that might have been a meal from earlier in the day. There were photographs on every surface, family pictures spanning decades, the kind of accumulated visual history that people in Grant's world hung in galleries, and people in Bertie's world kept close. She sat in the chair nearest the window, didn't offer him coffee, didn't offer him anything. They looked at each other. She didn't speak for a long time. Grant waited. He had learned patience from men who used it as a weapon, but this was different. Bertie's silence wasn't strategy. It was the silence of someone deciding how much of a story they could carry and how much they needed to put down. Finally, she said, "He came in November." She didn't say who. She didn't need to. He brought papers, she continued. Said Jolene's situation was going to cause problems. Said the family she was involved with had arrangements that couldn't be disrupted. Said there would be money. Housing someone to look after me. She paused. Then he put a photograph on the table. She didn't describe the photograph. She didn't have to. Grant felt something cold settle in his chest. Not surprise. Not shock. Just the particular weight of a thing you suspected being confirmed, which is almost worse than surprise because you've been carrying the possibility and hoping you were wrong. He told me Jolene would be safe, Bertie said, that she'd be protected, that she'd have what she needed. He just needed her to be gone. And you believed him. Bertie looked at him steadily. I believed that photograph, she said. Grant didn't push it. He sat with what she'd said and let it be what it was. Where is she? He asked. Bertie's hands tightened on the arms of her chair. I don't know exactly, she said. She moves. She doesn't tell me where she's going to be, because she knows they might come here. She knows they might come here, Grant repeated. She's not stupid, Bertie said flatly. She knows what kind of people you come from. That landed the way it was meant to. Grant stood. He looked around the small room one more time, the photographs, the handmade quilt on the sofa back, the single lamp casting its circle of yellow light against the February dark. He said, I'm sorry, Mrs. Vey. Bertie looked out the window. Sorry doesn't warm a house, she said. You want to do something useful. Find my granddaughter before she has that baby alone. Malcolm Holloway had an office in the Drayton Street building that was larger than Grant's. He had occupied it for 30 years, first as Grant's father's second, then as the interim director during the long illness, and then after the funeral, after the settlement, after everything was formalized as Grant's mentor and organizational shadow. He was 64 years old, silver-haired, the kind of physically composed that came from decades of presenting a certain face to the world and no longer having to think about it consciously. He wore reading glasses that he removed when he wanted to be taken seriously, and he had a habit of turning his ring finger on his right hand when he was calculating something. Grant walked into the office without knocking. Malcolm looked up from his desk, took his glasses off. Grant, tell me about Jolene Vey, Grant said. He closed the door behind him, did not sit. Malcolm set his glasses on the desk. His expression was measured, not guilty, not defensive, the expression of a man who has rehearsed this conversation at some point and is now deciding which version to use. She was a complication, Malcolm said. That's not what I asked you. It's the context. I don't need context, Grant said. I need you to tell me what you did. Malcolm leaned back in his chair. The ring began to turn. The Langford engagement, he said, represents 4 decades of relationship building. It secures the organization's financial position for the next 20 years. A pregnant seamstress. He stopped, reconsidered. A pregnancy, in the wrong moment, from the wrong circumstances, would have destroyed that alliance. Sterling Langford is not a patient man, and his daughter is not a forgiving one. So you erased her. I secured the arrangement, Malcolm said. I made sure the situation couldn't unravel what we had spent years building. Grant stood there. He looked at his uncle, the man who had taught him how to run an organization, how to read a room, how to calculate risk, how to make decisions that served the larger structure rather than the individual impulse. You put a death certificate on my desk, Grant said. Yes, with her name on it. Yes, and you watched me read it. Malcolm said nothing. You stood in my office, Grant continued, and you told me she was gone, and you watched me fold that document and put it in a drawer, and you let me believe it. You believed it because you wanted to, Malcolm said, and there was something in his voice, not cruelty exactly, but precision, the way a surgeon describes a difficult procedure. You were relieved, Grant. I watched you be relieved. Don't make me the only villain in this story. The silence that followed was the kind that leaves marks. Grant heard it. He did not argue with it, because it was true. He had been relieved. He had taken the path that let him put the problem in a drawer and walk forward without having to face what he'd let happen. You don't get to decide who lives and who disappears in my family, Grant said. Someone has to, Malcolm said. Not you, Grant said. Not anymore. He left Malcolm's office and went down the hall to the operations director's room and, in 15 minutes, transferred Malcolm Holloway's organizational authority to interim management. He did it quietly. No announcement, no drama, just paperwork. When he came back out, he passed Malcolm's door. Through the glass panel, he could see his uncle still sitting at his desk, his glasses back on, reading something on his desk. Malcolm did not look up, but as Grant watched, the corner of his uncle's mouth moved. Not a grimace, not a frown, a smile very small, very contained. The smile of a man who has expected this, planned for it, and is already 3 steps past it. Grant kept walking, but his stomach dropped, because he recognized that smile. He had seen it on men who had already moved their most important piece and were simply waiting for the board to catch up. Monica was at the Langford estate when he arrived that evening. She came to the door herself, which meant she'd been watching for him or for anyone. She had a kind of alertness that day that didn't fit her usual composure. Like something had been disturbing her that she hadn't decided how to name yet. They sat in the smaller sitting room, the one her parents didn't use. Monica poured 2 glasses of water and set them on the table between them, which Grant registered as the choice it was. Not wine, not tea, not anything that created a particular kind of atmosphere. Just water, simple. Honest, he told her. Not everything. Not the parts that were still moving and might change shape before they landed. But enough. Jolene, the pregnancy, the manufactured death. Malcolm's admission. Monica listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "My mother told me before the engagement was announced not to ask questions about your past." Grant looked at her. "She didn't say what I shouldn't ask about," Monica said. "She just said don't look too hard at things that seem settled. Some things are settled the way a heavy object sits on top of something. The pressure is holding it down, not the arrangement." "Did you know?" Grant asked. "No," Monica said, "but I suspected there was something I wasn't supposed to know, which is different from knowing and almost as bad." She picked up her glass, set it down without drinking. "I tried," she said. "I want you to know that. I tried to be whatever it was that would make you not need anything else. Anything outside. Anyone you'd had before, Monica." "I know," she said. "I know it doesn't work that way. I just want you to understand that I wasn't passive in this. I made choices too. I chose to not ask. I chose to keep polishing the surface." She stood. "I can't marry you," she said, "not because of her. Not entirely. Because of what this whole thing is. Because I don't think you can be honest with me, not because you're a bad person, but because the life you're running doesn't have room for honesty, and you haven't decided to change that yet." "I'm trying to change it now," Grant said. Monica looked at him. "I know you are," she said, "but I'm not willing to wait and see." She walked to the door. She didn't slam it. She didn't cry. She just closed it behind her, gently and firmly, the way you close a door in a house where people are sleeping. Grant sat in the chair for a moment. Then he stood, left the glass of water unfinished on the table, and walked out. Sterling Langford called the next morning. He did not open with pleasantries. "You understand what you've just done," Sterling said. "You understand the financial position this puts both our organizations in." "I do," Grant said. "I will pursue every legal avenue available to me. There are contracts. There are arrangements that were made in good faith, based on the agreement between our families. There are also records," Grant said, "of 17 transactions between Langford Holdings and a network of accounts that have been under federal review for the past 8 months. Records I have copies of. The silence on the phone had a different quality than the silence at dinner the night before." "You wouldn't," Sterling said. "I already wouldn't have faked a woman's death to protect a business arrangement," Grant said. "Keep that in mind when you're deciding what I will or won't do." The call ended. Grant put the phone down. He looked at his hands. He had learned that move from Malcolm, the patient accumulation of leverage, the willingness to hold information until the moment it was most useful. He had just used a technique his mentor had taught him to dismantle a part of everything his mentor had built. There was something almost architectural about that. He didn't let himself think about it long. He had more pressing things. Jolene was still out there, alone, moving between locations, buying diapers with cash, and carrying his daughter through a Savannah winter in a city full of people who had once wanted her to not exist. He needed to find her, and he needed to do it before Malcolm, smiling at his desk, turning his ring, already 3 moves ahead, decided to find her first. The thought settled in Grant's chest like a stone. Because Malcolm Holloway had not built 30 years of organizational authority by losing. And he hadn't smiled like that because he was done. He had smiled like that because he was just getting started. Grant didn't sleep that night. He lay on top of the covers in his room at the Drayton Street building. He kept a room there for late nights, nothing personal about it. Just a bed and a window and a bathroom, and stared at the ceiling with his shoulder pressed into the pillow and his mind running the same loop it had been running since he'd seen Malcolm's smile. Not the smile itself. What was behind it? Malcolm was 64 years old and had spent 30 of those years building relationships that Grant had inherited without fully understanding. Relationships with men in other cities, with financial structures that operated in the gaps between legitimate business and the kind of business that didn't get discussed at board meetings. Grant knew they existed. He had never needed to map them, precisely because Malcolm had always been the one who managed them. That was the problem. He sat up at 4 a.m. and called his operations director. "I need a full account audit," he said. Every external relationship Malcolm managed personally. Names, amounts, dates, communication records. Everything. "That's going to take time," the director said. "Start with the last 6 months," Grant said. He hung up and sat on the edge of the bed in the dark. The city outside was making its small early morning sounds. A truck somewhere. Water moving through old pipes in the building's walls. The particular quiet of Savannah before the heat began. He thought about Jolene checking price tags. The way she'd put the onesie back, and then picked it up again, and then put it back a second time. He thought about a woman who had once told him that the only thing more exhausting than being broke was being broke, while pretending everything was fine. She hadn't been talking about herself when she said it. She'd been talking about a neighbor, but he had filed it away, the way he filed most things not for use, just for inventory. He had treated her life like a collection of interesting facts, rather than the actual ongoing experience of another human being. He rubbed his face with both hands. There was no version of this story where he came out clean. He knew that. The question was what he did with the dirt. He found Jolene on a Thursday, not through surveillance or a hired search through Calder, who had apparently maintained a quiet and unofficial awareness of her location since she'd first disappeared, which was the kind of loyalty that operated entirely outside the chain of command and had nothing to do with organizational authority. Calder called Grant on a personal number at 9:30 a.m. and said, simply, "She's at the market on Fahm Street until 11. She goes every Thursday." Then he hung up. Grant drove himself. He didn't take a guard or tell anyone where he was going. He parked 2 blocks away and walked, which felt absurd. A man who ran a private organization, walking fast with his collar, turned up like he was the one who needed to hide. He saw her before she saw him. She was at the end of a row of vegetable stalls, examining a bundle of carrots with the same focused economy she'd brought to the baby store. Her coat was too light for the weather, not dramatically so, but enough that he could tell it was what she had, not what she'd chosen. She had let her hair grow longer. She looked tired in a specific way that pregnancy produced, where the tiredness had moved past the surface and settled somewhere structural. She was beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with the things people usually meant by that word. He walked toward her. She heard him when he was still several feet away, heard something or felt it and turned. The moment she recognized him, her face went through 3 things in about 2 seconds. Surprise, which she shut down almost immediately, anger, which she didn't bother hiding, and something underneath the anger that was harder to name, and that she clearly wasn't going to let him see if she could help it. "Don't," she said. "Jolene," I said, "don't." Her voice was quiet. Not the quiet of someone trying to avoid a scene, the quiet of someone who has made a decision and doesn't need volume to enforce it. "You don't get to walk up to me in public and act like this is a normal thing." "I know," Grant said. "Do you know how long I've been?" She stopped. Looked away. Looked back. "No, we're not doing this here." "Tell me where, then." She studied him for a moment. The carrots were still in her hand. She paid for them, put them in her bag, and walked. He followed. She led him to a small park 2 streets over, the kind that was more functional than decorative. A few benches, some old trees, a walking path that looped around a neglected fountain that had stopped running years ago. They sat on opposite ends of a bench. She put her bag between them. "Malcolm came to my grandmother," she said. "I know," Grant said. "I talked to Bertie." Something moved across her face. She's fine, she's home." Jolene looked at the dead fountain. "He came in October," she said. "I was 2 months along. I hadn't told you yet because," she paused. chose her words. Because I wasn't sure what you would do, and I needed to be sure before I handed you that information. Grant heard what she wasn't saying inside what she was saying. You were protecting yourself, he said. I was being realistic, she said. You were 3 weeks from announcing an engagement to a woman your family had been arranging for 2 years. I was a seamstress you'd been seeing on the quiet. The math wasn't complicated. Jolene, I'm not asking for an apology, she said sharply. I'm telling you the sequence of events. Malcolm showed up at Bertie's house while I was there. He had papers. He had a photograph. She stopped. You don't have to tell me what was in the photograph. It was of me, she said, coming out of the clinic where I'd had the pregnancy confirmed, which meant he'd been watching me before I even knew I was going to be a problem. She turned to look at him directly for the first time since they'd sat down. He was ahead of you, Grant. Months ahead. Was managing the situation before the situation had a shape. Grant sat with that. He told Bertie I would be protected, Jolene continued. That I would have money. That nobody would bother me. He made it sound reasonable. Like a relocation, not a removal. She pressed her mouth into a flat line. And then the people who came to make sure I understood what the alternative looked like made it very clear that reasonable wasn't actually the operating mode. What people, Grant said. His voice had changed, not louder. Tighter. 2 men, Jolene said. I don't know their names. They came to the first place I was staying, about 2 weeks after I left Savannah. They didn't say anything. They just stood in the room for a while. Looked at things. Made sure I understood the dimensions. Grant looked at his hands, and after that Jolene said, I kept moving. Every few weeks, paid cash. Stayed in places where nobody asked questions. She touched the side of her stomach briefly, involuntarily. It's harder when you're this size. I'm going to handle them, Grant said. Who the men? All of it, Malcolm. I don't need you to handle it, Jolene said. I need you to understand that I am not a problem that got away from you and needs to be recovered. I am a person who was erased by your family because she was inconvenient. Those are different things. The silence between them had weight. You're right, Grant said. She looked at him, waiting for the qualifier, the but, the however. It didn't come. You're right, he said again, and I don't know how to fix that. I don't know if it can be fixed, but I need you to know that I'm not here because you're a loose end. Then why are you here? Grant looked at the dead fountain. Because I saw you through that glass, he said, and something I had managed to put in a drawer and lock for 5 months broke open completely, and I have not been able to put it back. Jolene was quiet for a long moment. I'm not forgiving you today, she said. I know. Or tomorrow, I know. I don't know when. Or if. I know that too. She looked at him with the particular measuring quality. She had the way she assessed things, not for sentiment, but for structural integrity. Whether they would hold. I'm staying on Whitaker, she said finally. The yellow house with the broken gutter. Don't come unless I say you can. She stood, picked up her bag. And don't send anyone. I won't. She walked away without looking back. Grant sat on the bench alone for a while. The city moved around him, a dog pulling at its leash, 2 women talking as they passed, a kid on a bicycle cutting through the park with the magnificent recklessness of someone who has not yet learned that things can go wrong. He thought about the 2 men who had stood in Jolene's room and looked at things. He thought about Malcolm's smile. He got up and walked back to his car. The audit results started coming in on Friday afternoon. Grant sat at the long table in the operations room, with 4 people who knew how to read financial records and had the particular poker face of people paid to know things and not react to them. The picture that assembled itself over the next 3 hours was worse than he'd expected. Malcolm had been running a secondary network for at least 2 years. Not stealing from the Holloway organization, exactly nothing that crude. Something more sophisticated. He had been brokering information. Routes, schedules, personnel movements, the kind of operational data in certain other businesses who needed to know when and where and how things moved through a city. And the people he'd been selling it to were not, in any reasonable sense, people the Holloway organization should be anywhere near. An Eastern network. The name that came up in the communications, always indirect, always through 2 or 3 layers of coded language, was a group that had been expanding its southeastern presence for the past 3 years. Aggressive, well-financed, the kind of organization that didn't negotiate so much as accumulate. Grant looked at the timeline. The information sales had started 2 years ago. The engagement to Monica Langford had been formalized 18 months ago. The manufactured death certificate had been issued 5 months ago. He sat back in his chair and looked at the ceiling. He wasn't protecting the engagement, he said quietly. The operations director looked up. Sir? He wasn't protecting the Langford alliance, Grant said. That was the explanation he gave me. But that's not what this is. He looked at the records spread across the table. He was building a parallel structure. He needed me occupied, engaged, committed to the Langford merger, while he was selling our operational data to a network that is going to use it to move against us. The room was quiet. He needed Jolene gone, Grant continued, because a pregnancy would have disrupted the engagement timeline. And he needed the engagement to proceed because it gave him cover. A leadership transition with a new alliance, new financial relationships, new structural pressures, all of it, creating enough noise that nobody looked at what was moving underneath. He looked at the financial records again. How much has he sold them? Based on the communication patterns, the director said carefully, enough to map our primary distribution network, transit schedules, warehouse locations on the East Corridor, vehicle registration for the main fleet, and Grant's movements, another analyst said. Then, catching himself, your movements, sir. Grant looked at him. Yes, the analyst said quietly. The pattern suggests your personal schedule was included. Grant stood. He walked to the window. Below, Drayton Street ran its ordinary Thursday afternoon course. People on the sidewalk. A delivery truck double parked. A woman with a stroller cutting around it. Malcolm had sold his schedule to an Eastern network, which meant Malcolm wasn't just trying to reclaim organizational authority. He was letting someone else solve the problem for him. The way he had solved the problem of Jolene, by outsourcing the actual work to people who wouldn't hesitate the way Malcolm himself might. Tighten everything, Grant said. New routes, new schedules. Nothing on the main channels. And Holloway Sr.? The director asked. Grant thought about the smile, the ring turning on Malcolm's finger. 3 steps ahead. Watch him, Grant said. Don't approach him. Don't let him know we're watching. Just watch. That evening, Grant drove to the Whitaker Street house. He hadn't been invited. He knew that. He parked at the end of the block and sat in the car for a while, not entirely for sure what he was going to do, which was unusual for him. Grant Holloway was not a man who arrived at places without knowing what he planned to accomplish. He got out of the car. He walked to the house. The gutter was indeed broken, hanging at an angle off the eave above the porch, bent at the joint. He looked at it for a moment, then knocked. Jolene opened the door. She looked at him. I told you not to come unless... I know, he said. I need to tell you something. She read his face. Whatever she saw there made her step back and let him in. The house was small and bare in the particular way of places. People occupy temporarily the minimum of furniture, nothing decorative, a single lamp providing most of the light. She had a sewing kit open on the kitchen table, a half-finished small garment beside it, and the sight of it did something to Grant's chest that he couldn't have explained and didn't try to. She sat down. He remained standing. Malcolm has been giving your location to someone, he said. The color in her face shifted. We haven't confirmed that specifically, he said. But the pattern in what he's been selling suggests your information was part of it. Your current address may be compromised. She looked at the sewing on the table. You need to move, he said. I know that, she said quietly. Tonight, she looked up. I have a safe house, Grant said. It's not connected to the main organization. It's property I hold privately, separate from anything Malcolm has access to. Jolene was quiet for a moment. You want me to go somewhere you own, she said. He heard what the sentence meant. I know how that sounds, he said. I know it sounds like every other arrangement anyone has ever tried to put you in. I'm not asking you to be comfortable with it. I'm asking you to be safe. She looked at him for a long time. Then she got up and began gathering her things. She was packed in 20 minutes. Grant noted that the fact that 20 minutes was enough. That she had been living at a level of preparedness that meant 2 bags, cash, documents, the sewing kit, and a small collection of infant clothes she'd been making, folded into the bottom of the second bag. She had been ready to leave on short notice for months. He took the heavier bag. She didn't argue. They walked out together, and he held the door, and she passed through it without looking at him, and he locked it behind them both. The safe house was a modest property on the south side, A two-bedroom structure with a garden that had been maintained by an arrangement grant had held for 8 years for exactly the kind of emergency that required a location no one else knew about. Jolene walked through it methodically, checked the windows, the back exit, the sight lines from the front door. He stood in the kitchen and let her do it. When she was satisfied, she set her bags in the smaller bedroom and came back to the kitchen and filled a glass of water at the sink. "You knew Rook," she said. It wasn't a question. "He's been the family physician for 20 years, Grant said. "He came with Malcolm that day," she said, "to Bertie's house. He stood by the door. I don't think he said more than 3 words. But he was there." She looked at the glass. "He's the one who put his name on the certificate. You know that?" "I know. Is he going to face any consequences for it?" "Yes," Grant said. She looked at him. "I mean it," he said. "I know you mean it," she said. "I'm asking if meaning it is going to be enough." The question sat between them. "I don't know yet," he said. "I'm working on making it enough." She sat down at the kitchen table. He pulled out the chair across from her. They sat. No agenda, no transaction. Just 2 people at a table in a quiet house while outside, Savannah wound itself toward midnight. "Are you scared?" Grant asked. It surprised her. He could see that. "Of what specifically?" she said. "Any of it, the baby." Malcolm. Being here, she was quiet for a moment. "I'm scared every day," she said. "I've been scared since October. I just stopped letting it make my decisions." She looked at the table. "The baby," she paused. "Not scared exactly. More like I know this is the most important thing I've ever done, and I have no idea if I'm ready for it, and the not knowing keeps me awake some nights." "You're going to be ready," Grant said. Jolene looked at him. "You don't know that." "No," he said. "But you've been managing every part of this alone for 5 months. You've moved when you needed to move, planned when you needed to plan, protected yourself and your grandmother without any resources I would have considered adequate. So no, I don't know for certain, but I know the evidence." She looked at him for a moment longer than was comfortable. Then she got up. "There's one room," she said. "I'm using it. There's a couch. That's fine." She picked up her water glass, paused at the doorway, didn't turn. "I still don't trust you," she said. "I know, I might not get there." "I know that too," Grant said. She went to the bedroom. He heard the door close. Not the careful, deliberate close Monica had given her door when she left. This was different. The close of someone who was exhausted and cautious, and not done deciding yet, and needed to be on the other side of a wall from him, while she figured out which way the deciding was going to fall. Grant sat on the couch. He didn't sleep. Around 2 in the morning, he heard her moving in the bedroom. Not restless, purposeful, careful. Managing something without calling for help. He sat with the impulse to knock and the understanding that he wasn't supposed to. He stayed on the couch. By the following Monday, Malcolm had made his move. Not dramatically. Malcolm didn't do dramatic. He did it the way he did everything, through quiet channels, patient accumulation, the slow turning of pieces that looked unrelated, until they were all facing the same direction. 3 calls to old partners. Not threatening, not even urgent. Just the familiar voice of a man they had worked with for 30 years, raising a mild concern that the Holloway leadership had become unstable. That Grant's personal situation had created the kind of distraction that was going to cost people money. That there were questions about direction and reliability. He didn't have to say anything explicit. He had 30 years of accumulated trust on every one of those calls. By the end of the week, Grant's credit lines had developed complications. 2 distribution relationships had gone quiet, not canceled, not hostile, just suddenly slow to respond. The way people go quiet when they're waiting to see which way a thing falls. A key operational member sent a message through an intermediary, asking questions about the organization's current structure. Grant sat in his office and read the intelligence reports and felt the shape of what Malcolm was doing with something close to professional admiration. His uncle was dismantling his authority without firing a single bullet. No confrontation, no declaration. Just the patient erosion of confidence, relationship by relationship, until the structure started bending under its own weight. "He's going to call a meeting," Grant's director said. "I know," Grant said. "He still has the loyalty of at least 4 senior members. Possibly more, I know that too. If he consolidates them." "He won't get the chance," Grant said. He picked up the phone. Not to call Malcolm, not to call the senior members. He called each one himself. Personally. No intermediary. Not to argue. Not to threaten. He simply told each of them, directly, what they had been hiding. The name of the account they weren't reporting. The relationship they maintained outside the organization's knowledge. The arrangement they had made during the previous year that they believed nobody knew about. He said it without accusation and without threat. He said it the way a man confirms that he knows the landscape he's standing in not to destroy, just to demonstrate that nothing is hidden from him. By the time Malcolm called the meeting, 3 of the 4 senior members had already quietly confirmed their loyalty to Grant. The 4th arrived at the warehouse and looked at the table and understood, within the first 60 seconds, that the room had already decided. Malcolm stood at the head of the table. Grant sat at the far end. There were 9 men between them. Malcolm spoke for a while. He was good at it, organized, persuasive, the kind of speaker who made reason sound like common sense. He talked about organizational stability, about the Langford situation, about the distraction of personal complications. Nobody interrupted him. When he finished, the room was silent. Then, one by one, not dramatically, not in any practiced way, the men at the table stopped looking at Malcolm and looked at Grant. It was a simple thing, just the direction of 8 sets of eyes. But Malcolm understood it immediately. He stood at the head of the table for a long moment. Then he set his hands flat on the table, in the way of a man completing something, and walked out. Grant took his seat at the head of the table. The organization was his. But as Grant looked around the room at the men who had just chosen him, something cold and precise settled in his stomach, because he understood that Malcolm had known this would happen. Had walked into that warehouse knowing the numbers, knowing the room, knowing the outcome, and had walked in anyway, which meant the meeting wasn't the point. The meeting was the distraction. While Grant had been focused on the warehouse and the senior members and the consolidation of loyalty, something else had been moving. He was reaching for his phone when it rang. Calder's number. He answered immediately. Calder's voice was rough, stripped of its usual composure. They went to the house, Calder said. Jolene's old place on Whitaker. They didn't know she'd moved. Grant stood. Who? 2 men. They tore the place up, sewing machine. Furniture. The baby things she'd left there. When? An hour ago. I just heard. Grant looked at the table of men watching him. Is she safe? She wasn't there, Calder said, but they know she was. Grant ended the call. He looked at the table. We're done, he said. He left the warehouse. He drove faster than was careful, and told himself it didn't mean anything that his hands on the wheel were not entirely steady, because it meant nothing, because she was safe, because she hadn't been there. But someone had gone to find her, and the next time, they would know to look somewhere new. Malcolm still had 1 piece on the board, and he had just shown Grant exactly how willing he was to play it. Grant drove to the safe house with both hands on the wheel and his phone on the seat beside him, and the particular kind of controlled speed that looks like composure from the outside and is nothing like composure from the inside. He told himself, pulling out of the warehouse lot, that she was safe. Calder had confirmed it. She hadn't been at the Whitaker house. She was at the safe house, the property Malcolm didn't know about, the address that existed in no document connected to the Holloway organization. He told himself this 3 times on the drive over. He was still telling himself when he turned onto the south side street and saw that the lights in the safe house were on. He parked, walked to the door, knocked twice the pattern he'd told her to listen for. She opened it. She was dressed, which meant she hadn't been asleep. She looked at his face and stepped back to let him in without asking a question, which meant she understood the shape of what had happened, even if she didn't have the specific details yet. They went to Whitaker, he said. I know. She turned toward the kitchen. Calder called me too. Grant stopped. He has your number? He got it to me through Bertie, she said. About 3 months ago. He said someone should be able to reach me directly if something happened and you weren't available to relay it. She filled the kettle at the sink, set it on the burner. He didn't say it was behind your back. He just did it. Grant stood in the kitchen doorway. Calder had given Jolene a direct line 3 months ago. 3 months ago, Grant had been planning a wedding and reviewing quarterly reports and believing a death certificate. While his driver, his 61-year-old driver who had worked for the family for 19 years, had been quietly threading a safety line between 2 people who didn't yet know they needed one. What did they do to the house? Jolene asked. Sewing machine. Furniture, the clothes you'd left. She had her back to him at the stove. He watched her shoulders. They didn't move. She stood very still for 3 seconds, then reached up and took 2 cups from the cabinet. The baby things? She asked. I don't have the full inventory, Grant said. I'm sorry. She set the cups down, nodded once. Okay, she said. That was all. Grant looked at her back and thought about what it cost a person to say okay, to absorb the information that someone had destroyed the handmade garments she'd been sewing for months. The tiny things she'd cut and stitched in the quiet hours of temporary rooms, and compress it into a single syllable and keep standing at the stove. He thought about how much practice it took to respond to damage that way. He thought about how none of that practice should have been necessary. I'm going to find the 2 men, he said. I heard you say that before. This time I have better information about where to look. She turned around. Her face was composed in the particular way of someone who is using composure as a tool, deliberately, because the alternative takes up too much energy. And then what? She said. You find them. You deal with them. Malcolm finds 2 other men. You deal with those. And meanwhile I'm in this house, and the baby is coming in 6 weeks and… She stopped, pressed her lips together. I'm not questioning your competence. I'm questioning the strategy, because the strategy right now is reactive. You're responding to what he does, and he's been planning this longer than you've been aware of it. Grant looked at her. You're right, he said. I know I am, she said without satisfaction. The question is what you're going to do about it. The kettle began to sound. She turned back to it. He left the safe house at midnight. He drove across the city to a bar near the waterfront that was open late and didn't have cameras, and was the kind of place where certain types of men came when they wanted to be somewhere specific without that somewhere being documented. He had the names from his operations team. 2 men. Both with addresses in the city, both with histories that ran alongside the Holloway organization, close enough to know its edges without being formally inside them. Grant went to the bar alone. He found them at a corner table with 2 beers and a card game between them, and he sat down across from them without being invited, and he placed 2 photographs on the table. Not photographs of them, photographs of their families. He didn't say anything threatening. He didn't need to. The photographs were the threat, and the threat was specific and personal, and calibrated not a general warning, but a demonstration that he knew exactly where the important things in their lives were located. He said, You went to a house tonight where a pregnant woman has been staying. The taller one started to speak. Grant didn't let him. I'm not asking you to explain it, he said. I'm telling you that the next time anyone connected to you goes within 4 blocks of that woman, the photographs on this table become the least of your problems. He stood. Leave Savannah, he said. Not because I'm ordering you. Because the man who sent you tonight is not going to protect you from what happens if you stay. He walked out. He drove back toward the Drayton Street building and thought about Jolene's word, reactive. She was right. He had been reactive since the moment he'd seen her through the glass. Responding. Catching up. Plugging holes. Malcolm had been building this structure for 2 years. Maybe longer. To dismantle it, Grant needed to stop following Malcolm's moves and make one of his own. He was at the building by 1 a.m, in the operations room, with the audit record spread across the table again, when his director knocked and came in. We found something, the director said. He set a folder on the table. Grant opened it. It was a communication record, buried in the layered coding of Malcolm's secondary network correspondence. A single exchange, 3 months ago, between an account connected to Malcolm's personal management and a receiver identified by a code that Grant's analyst had spent 2 days unwinding. When they'd unwound it, the receiver turned out to be a legal firm. Not a criminal network contact, not an Eastern organization liaison. A law firm, based in Atlanta, specializing in organizational restructuring and succession planning. Grant looked at the paperwork. He retained them 8 months ago, the director said quietly. The engagement it's not straightforward. It would take the legal team time to fully… Give me the summary, Grant said. The director took a breath. The short version is that Malcolm has been building a legal case for conservatorship, he said. On the grounds that the organization's primary director, you has demonstrated a pattern of impaired judgment constituting a risk to organizational assets. He paused. The evidence he's been compiling includes the broken Langford engagement, The operational disruptions of the past 3 weeks, and he stopped. And what, Grant said. A psychological evaluation. Commissioned through Rook's office, submitted under a false referral. It concludes that you present indicators consistent with what they're calling an attachment-based decision disorder, the clinical framing for the argument that your personal relationship with Jolene Vey has compromised your capacity to lead. The room was very quiet. Grant looked at the folder. He turned 3 pages without reading them. When was this filed? He said. It hasn't been filed yet, the director said. It's staged. The filing is set for Friday. If it goes through, it triggers an automatic organizational review under the Emergency Governance Clause your father wrote into the founding documents. That clause allows for interim leadership to be installed during a review period. Interim leadership, Grant said. Malcolm's name is listed as interim director. Grant set the folder down. He looked at the wall. He had stripped Malcolm of operational authority. Had watched him walk out of a warehouse. Had believed on some level that he hadn't fully examined that the loss of the room's attention was equivalent to the loss of the war. Malcolm had let him believe that. Malcolm had been filing legal paperwork for 8 months. The psychological evaluation, Grant said. Rook's signed it? Yes, sir. Pull everything we have on Rook. Medical board records. Patient files accessible under the organizational relationship. Any financial connection between Rook's practice and Malcolm's personal accounts. We've started on that. And the Atlanta firm. I want to know every case they've taken in the last 5 years. Every client, every outcome. That will take longer. I have until Friday, Grant said. Start now. The director left. Grant sat in the empty operations room with the folder in front of him and the overhead light making everything look flat and institutional. Friday was 4 days away. Malcolm had built an 8-month legal structure designed to remove Grant from his own organization on the grounds that caring about what happened to Jolene was a disorder. He heard Jolene's voice from earlier. The strategy right now is reactive. He pressed both hands flat on the table, took a breath, took another one. Then he picked up his phone and called the one person he had not yet called. The attorney's name was Vera Stiles. She operated independently, which was a euphemism for the fact that she worked in the space between the formal legal world and the informal one, and she was expensive, and she was very good, and she had represented the Holloway organization twice before in situations that required someone capable of holding 2 frameworks in their head, simultaneously, and finding the seam between them. She picked up on the second ring, despite the hour, which told Grant she either didn't sleep or had been expecting his call. Malcolm filed for conservatorship, Grant said without preamble. I know, Vera said. Grant stopped. How do you know? Because he called me 6 weeks ago, she said. He wanted to retain me for the filing. Grant's hand tightened on the phone. And, he said. And I declined, Vera said. Because I've worked for the Holloway organization, which means I've worked for you, not for individual members of your family acting independently. And because what he was proposing was a pause, it was legal in structure. But it wasn't clean. Why didn't you call me? Attorney-client privilege extends to consultation, she said. Even declined consultation. I couldn't breach that. I can tell you now because he's moved beyond consultation and into action, which means the confidentiality calculus has changed. Grant stood up from the table, walked to the window. What does he have, he asked. Enough to trigger the review, Vera said. Rook's evaluation is the centerpiece. The governance clause in your founding documents is unfortunately broad. It was written to protect the organization from incapacitated leadership, and the definition of incapacitation is subjective enough that a sympathetic court could read it widely. What do I need to stop it? Evidence that the evaluation is fraudulent, she said. Rook's signature means nothing if we can demonstrate the evaluation was commissioned under false pretenses and conduct without actual examination. Alongside that, you need evidence of Malcolm's own misconduct, sufficient to demonstrate that the conservatorship filing itself is an act of bad faith. I have the financial records, Grant said. The Eastern Network correspondence. The information sales. That's your starting point, Vera said. Send it all to me tonight. I'll have a response framework by morning. Grant ended the call. He sent the files. Then he sat back down at the table and looked at the conservatorship documents again. Attachment-based decision disorder. Malcolm had taken the one thing Grant had done that was genuinely uncomplicatedly right, trying to find a woman who had been wrongfully erased and had weaponized it, had framed it in clinical language that made it sound like pathology, had built a legal structure around the argument that being unwilling to abandon Jolene was a form of dysfunction. It was, Grant thought, almost elegant. Malcolm had always been elegant. The next morning, Grant drove to the house where Rook had his private practice, a converted Victorian on a quiet street that served the upper end of Savannah's private medical community. He had called ahead, which gave Rook 50 minutes to prepare whatever version of himself he was planning to present. Rook was ready when Grant arrived, sitting behind his desk, jacket on, hands folded, the face of a man who has decided on his position and intends to maintain it. Grant sat across from him. He set 3 documents on the desk. The first was the death certificate. The second was a statement from the hospital listed on the certificate, confirming that no record of Jolene Vey's admission existed in their system. The third was a financial transfer record between a numbered account connected to Malcolm's personal management and an account held in Rook's wife's name. 18 months ago, $40,000. Rook looked at the documents. He did not touch them. The evaluation you filed, Grant said. The psychological assessment. When did you examine me? Rook said nothing when Grant said, date, location, duration of examination. The assessment was, when did you examine me, Silas? The silence was its own answer. You signed a psychological evaluation of a patient you never examined, Grant said. You signed a death certificate for a woman who never died. You have received $40,000 from my uncle's personal accounts. He paused. I want to know how many other documents you have signed that correspond to nothing real. Rook's composure was beginning to show its seams. What do you want? He said. A sworn statement, Grant said, detailing the circumstances under which both documents were produced. Malcolm's instruction, the payment, the timeline. If I do that, you lose your license either way, Grant said. The question is whether you lose it in a manner that also involves criminal proceedings. He looked at the man steadily. The statement gives you the first option. Silence gives you the second. Rook looked at the window. He was 63 years old and had built a practice over 30 years and had made a calculation at some point the way people make calculations when someone with authority and money puts a specific offer in front of them, and had believed, the way people always believe, that the risk was manageable. I'll need my attorney present, Rook said. Call them, Grant said. He waited in the outer office for 40 minutes. When he came back in, Rook's attorney, a careful, middle-aged woman who clearly had been briefed quickly and was still assembling. The full picture looked at Grant with the expression of someone doing math in real time. The statement took 2 hours. It was specific, detailed, and damning. When Grant left with the signed document in his hand, he sat in his car outside Rook's practice for a while. He had what he needed. He should have felt the forward movement of it, the traction of things beginning to resolve. Instead, he sat there with the document on the passenger seat and felt the weight of how many points on this timeline required someone to have made a different choice. Rook could have refused. Elias could have refused. Calder had refused quietly, in his own way, by writing an address on a piece of paper. Malcolm could have simply told Grant the truth. Grant himself could have been paying enough attention that the truth wasn't something that needed to be hidden. He started the car. It was the following afternoon when everything broke. He was in the operations room with Vera on the phone, walking through the filing strategy, when his director opened the door with a face that had been drained of its professional neutrality and replaced with something unguarded and urgent. Grant held up a hand and ended the call. What? He said. Malcolm is gone, the director said. What do you mean gone? He left the estate this morning. Car is gone. Staff say he had 2 suitcases. No forwarding information. Grant stood, tracked the vehicle. We are. It went dark on I-16, heading west. We lost it near the county line. Grant looked at the wall. Malcolm hadn't waited for Friday. He hadn't waited to see whether the conservatorship filing would succeed. He had built the filing as a distraction, another distraction, the same play as the warehouse meeting. And while Grant had been obtaining Rook's statement and preparing a legal counter-response, Malcolm had been packing. He's not running, Grant said. The director waited. He's repositioning, Grant said. He's moving to somewhere with the network. The Eastern contacts. He's not abandoning the play. He's changing the board. His phone rang, not his main line. His personal number. The one very few people had. He looked at the screen. Unknown, he answered. The voice on the other end was male, accented, unhurried. The accent was from somewhere, Grant placed quickly, not Eastern European, but Baltic, the kind of particular geographic quality that you recognized if you'd spent time with enough different people. Mr. Holloway, the voice said, my name is not important. What is important is that we have mutual interests and a mutual problem. Grant said nothing. He gestured to his director to begin a trace. Your uncle has been our partner for 2 years, the voice continued. He provided useful information, but in the last 48 hours he has contacted us with a proposal that changes the nature of our relationship. What proposal? Grant said. He has offered us 3 things, the voice said. Operational authority over the Holloway distribution network, full access to Eastern Corridor warehousing, and the current location of the woman. Grant's hand tightened on the phone until he felt it in his knuckles. The woman, he says she is important to you, the voice said. He says that presenting her to us, or more precisely, placing her in a situation where she is no longer manageable, would give us the leverage to complete the organizational transition he has been arranging. The room had gone very still. Grant looked at his director. The man was on another phone, gesturing rapidly, face tight. Why are you telling me this? Grant said. Because Malcolm Holloway is 64 years old and has a drinking problem and an ego that has outgrown his usefulness, the voice said, and we do not enjoy being made instruments of a family dispute. We are a business. What he is proposing is personal. We don't work personal, so you want something from me. We want a renegotiation, the voice said. Your uncle is no longer our interface. You are. That requires a conversation that does not involve him. And the woman, Grant said, is not our concern, the voice said. Malcolm presented her as leverage. We have no interest in leverage. We have interest in operations. Where is he? Grant said. A pause. I said the woman is not our concern, the voice said. I did not say Malcolm is not yours. The line went dead. Grant put the phone down. He looked at his director. Trace, he said. Working on it, the director said. Give me 2 minutes. Grant picked up his personal phone and dialed Jolene. It rang 4 times. 5, 6. His director said, Trace is... Jolene picked up. Grant. Her voice was level, but something underneath it wasn't. Are you in the house? He said. Yes. Lock every door and don't open them until I call you back. Don't open them for anyone. Do you hear me? A pause. What happened? She said. I'll explain when I get there. Lock the doors. They're already locked, she said. They've been locked since last night. Good. He released a breath he hadn't known he was holding. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Don't, there's a car, Jolene said. Grant stopped. What kind of car? He said. Parked across the street. Wasn't there an hour ago. Dark. Engine's off, but I can see someone in the driver's seat. Grant was already moving toward the door. Stay away from the windows, he said. I'm coming right now. He did not run. Running in a building like this created its own kind of alarm. He walked fast, out of the operations room, down the hall, down the stairs, out through the side entrance to where his car was parked. He called his director from the car. I need 2 people at the Calhoun address in 10 minutes, he said. Quiet, no visible approach. On it he drove. The 20 minutes he'd told Jolene became 12 because of the specific way he drove when the thing he was driving toward mattered enough that the usual calculations about traffic and visibility no longer applied. He came around the corner of her street slowly. The dark car was there. Passenger side facing the house. Grant parked a block up. Got out. Walked on the far side of the street. As he came level with the car, he could see the driver. Malcolm. Not 2 men, not Eastern Network contractors. Malcolm himself, sitting alone in his own car in the dark on a residential street, watching the window of the house where Jolene was. He had driven out of the Holloway estate with 2 suitcases and ended up here. Grant crossed the street. He opened the passenger door and got in. Malcolm looked at him without surprise. He looked old. Not in the way he had always looked silver-haired, composed, the controlled aging of a man who managed himself. He looked old in the way people look when something holding them together has let go. His jacket was wrinkled. His eyes were flat. You spoke to them, Malcolm said. They called me, Grant said. Malcolm looked at the house. You told them where she was, Grant said. Malcolm didn't answer. You told them where she was, Grant said again, and the steadiness in his own voice surprised him, Because underneath it, something had shifted irrevocably, not to anger, past anger, to something colder and more permanent. I needed leverage, Malcolm said. You used a pregnant woman as leverage, with an Eastern criminal network. I needed, say it again, Grant said. Say leverage again. I want to hear you use that word one more time. Malcolm was quiet. She's carrying my daughter, Grant said. The word daughter landed in the car like a stone. Malcolm looked at him. For the first time, something crossed his uncle's face that wasn't calculation, wasn't strategy. It was something older and less organized than any of that, something that looked, underneath its composure, like a man recognizing the full dimension of what he had done. You knew, Grant said, when you put that death certificate on my desk. You knew she was pregnant. Malcolm said nothing. You knew and you erased her anyway, Grant said. And when that didn't hold, you tried to have her removed through other people. And when that didn't hold, you gave her address to a network that you knew would not be delicate about how they resolved the problem. The silence in the car was total. I raised you, Malcolm said. I know that, Grant said. Everything I did was for this organization. For your father's legacy. For my father, Grant said, would not have forged a death certificate for a 27-year-old woman carrying his grandchild. Malcolm looked away. His hands were in his lap. They weren't steady. Grant looked at them, those hands that had signed documents, managed operations, shaped the organization for 30 years, and felt something that wasn't compassion and wasn't contempt. Something's in between. Something that came from looking at a person long enough to see the specific shape of where they had failed, and understanding that the failure was real and irreversible, and didn't unmake everything that had come before it. Get out of Savannah, Grant said. Malcolm turned to look at him. I'm not filing criminal charges today, Grant said. I have the legal documentation to do it, the financial records. Brooks' statement, the network correspondence, all of it. He paused. I'm giving you 24 hours. You leave with those 2 suitcases, and you go somewhere that isn't here. And if I don't, Malcolm said, then I stop making a distinction between what you did to this organization and what you did to her, Grant said. And every document I have goes to every authority I can reach. Malcolm looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked at the house with the lights on behind the curtains. He said very quietly, your father would be at peace, knowing what kind of man you've become. Grant looked at him. He didn't know whether it was true or whether it was one final calculation, one last thing offered in the hope that sentiment would soften the terms. He got out of the car. He crossed the street. He knocked on the door, 2 knocks the pattern, and waited. Jolene opened it. She looked at his face, then passed his shoulder at the dark car across the street. Who is that? She said. No one who's going to be here tomorrow, Grant said. She looked at him for a moment. Then she stepped back. He came inside. Behind him, he heard the engine start across the street and the sound of a car pulling away, and then the street was quiet. He stood in the small front room of the safe house and looked at Jolene, 7 months pregnant, steady, watching him with those measuring eyes that had never once given him a version of himself that was more comfortable than accurate, and understood that everything that had protected him from the full weight of his own history had just driven away. There was no structure between himself and what he had to become now. No uncle who managed the difficult things. No organization that absorbed the cost of his decisions. No engagement that provided cover. No version of himself that could keep this at a manageable distance. Just this was what Swan's child was carrying, and the damage that had been done in his name that he hadn't caused but hadn't prevented, and the fact that preventing it going forward was now entirely, irrevocably his. He looked at Jolene. I need to tell you everything, he said. She looked back at him. Then sit down, she said. He sat. He sat at the kitchen table and told her everything. Not the version he would have told a week ago, organized, strategic, the parts selected for maximum reassurance and minimum discomfort. All of it. The network correspondence, the conservatorship filing, Rook's statement, the phone call from the Baltic Voice, Malcolm sitting in the dark car across the street with 2 suitcases and nowhere useful to go. Jolene listened without interrupting. She sat across from him with her hands flat on the table and her eyes on his face, and the particular quality of attention she brought to things that mattered, not passive, not waiting for her turn to speak, actually listening, tracking, assembling. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. The network, she said. The Eastern contacts. Malcolm told them where I was. Yes. And now Malcolm is gone. Yes, but they still have the address. Grant looked at her. He had been moving so fast through the last hour, Malcolm in the car, the conversation, the departure, getting inside, that he had not fully landed on this specific fact. They still had the address. Malcolm leaving Savannah did not erase what he had already given them. We need to move you, Grant said. We need to move me again, Jolene said. Yes. She looked at the table. She pressed both hands flat against the surface and breathed out slow through her nose, not dramatic. Just the sound of a person absorbing one more thing when they have already absorbed more than was reasonable. Okay, she said. She started to stand. Jolene. She looked at him. I'm sorry, he said. I know that's insufficient. I know it doesn't fix the geography of your situation, or the fact that you've been moving every few weeks for 5 months. I know what sorry is worth at this point, which is not much. But I need you to know that I understand what has been done, and I understand my part in it. She looked at him steadily. Get the bags, she said. He drove her to a property he had not told anyone about. Not his director, not Vera, not Calder. A small house on the north side that he held under a name connected through 3 layers of corporate structure to nothing that resembled him. He had acquired it 4 years ago for a reason he could no longer fully remember, and had maintained it out of the same organizational habit that made men like him keep resources in places nobody was looking. He had never brought anyone here. He unlocked the door and turned on the lights and stood back while Jolene walked through it the same way she'd walked through the last place windows, back exit, sight lines. It's cleaner than the last one, she said. I'll get supplies in the morning, he said. She set her bag in the bedroom and came back to the kitchen and leaned against the counter with her arms folded across her stomach, which she did. He had noticed when she was tired and the weight was becoming architectural. You should sleep, he said. I should, she agreed. Neither of them moved. The network, she said. Are they going to come? I don't know, Grant said. The man who called me said they weren't interested in personal leverage. But that was before Malcolm left. The calculus may have changed. So you don't know? No. She nodded. That's the first time you've said that to me about something operational, she said. Usually you tell me what's going to happen. Usually I believe I know, Grant said. She looked at him. Something shifted in her expression, not softening exactly, more like a recalibration. The way a person's face changes when they encounter something they weren't expecting and are deciding how to account for it. The couch is yours, she said. She went to the bedroom. He sat on the couch and did not sleep and listened to the house and the street outside with the particular alertness that had no off switch and that he had long since stopped trying to turn off. At 4 a.m, his phone vibrated. His director, a text, call me. He went to the kitchen, away from the bedroom door, and called. They moved, his director said. 2 vehicles. We picked them up on the south side 40 minutes ago, the Calhoun address. The safe house. The one he'd moved Jolene from 3 hours ago. They went in? Grant said. Went in, found it empty, came out. They're moving now. We don't know the direction yet. They're looking for a new address, Grant said. Yes. Which means someone is feeding them updated information, Grant said. Malcolm gave them the Calhoun address, but he didn't have the north side address. So they're working from something else, or someone else, his director said. Grant stood at the kitchen counter in the dark. Someone else. He ran the list. Who knew about the Calhoun property? His director, Vera, Calder, the man who had given Jolene a direct phone line 3 months ago through Birdie. The man who had written an address on a piece of paper and left without explanation. The man Grant had trusted without examining, because the gesture of writing the address had looked like loyalty, and he had been in a state where loyalty was what he needed to see. Where is Calder right now? Grant said. A pause on the other end. I don't know, his director said. Find him, Grant said. Don't approach, just locate. He ended the call. He stood in the kitchen. He thought about Calder's face when Grant had asked for the address. The way he'd reached immediately into his breast pocket, like the paper was already there, already written, waiting to be given. Already written. How long had it been written? If Calder had given Jolene's contact information to Malcolm's people at the same moment he'd given Grant the address, if the paper in the pocket had been part of a larger arrangement, a way of managing both sides of the situation simultaneously, keeping everyone located and accessible. Then every safe house Grant had used had been compromised from the moment he'd chosen it. His chest was tight. He went to the bedroom door and knocked. Jolene. He kept his voice level. I need you to get up. She was already awake. The door opened in under 10 seconds. She looked at his face. Again she said, I'm sorry, he said. She went for the bags. They were in the car before 5, driving north on streets that were still dark and mostly empty. Grant running routes in his head and discarding them with the specific efficiency of a man who has spent 20 years thinking about how things move through a city. Where are we going? Jolene said. I don't know yet, Grant said. She looked at him. Okay, she said. They drove. His phone vibrated on the console. His director. He put it on speaker. Calder's car is on I-16 heading west, the director said. Same route Malcolm took. Grant's hands tightened on the wheel. Same route, he said. 40 minutes behind Malcolm's last known position. Jolene was looking out the window. Grant could see the line of her jaw from the side. She had heard. They were coordinating, Grant said. Calder and Malcolm. It looks like it, his director said. There's more. I pulled Calder's financials, the personal accounts, separate from his staff payment. There's a series of transfers, 18 months. From Malcolm's accounts? Adjacent accounts. The same structure he used for Rook. A pause. Grant. Calder has been on this since the beginning. Before the death certificate. Before October. The road went under the car, and the city opened up on either side in the gray pre-dawn, and Grant drove. He thought about 19 years. He thought about a man who had driven him to hospitals and airports and meetings for 19 years, who had known every address Grant had ever used, who had understood the organization's geography better than almost anyone because he moved through it daily and invisibly. He thought about a piece of paper produced too quickly from a breast pocket. The phone line, Grant said. The one Calder gave Jolene through Birdie. Is that compromised? If Calder is working with them, then yes. They have her number. Grant looked at Jolene's phone in her hand. Turn it off, he said. She looked at him right now. Turn it completely off. She powered it down. He drove another 8 minutes in silence. Then he said, Tell me something. The man on the phone last night, the one who called me. He said Malcolm had given them her location. If Calder was also feeding them information, they had 2 sources on her. Yes, his director said. So why did the man call me, Grant said. Why tip me off? If they had 2 sources tracking her, why warn me? Silence on the other end. Grant drove. The answer assembled itself quietly, the way answers did when you stop trying to force them and let the structure of the thing speak. They weren't warning me, Grant said. They were testing me. They wanted to see what I'd do, whether I'd protect her, whether she mattered enough to me to move on. Because if she does, if she's that important, she's not just leverage. She's a long-term asset. His director didn't say anything. They're not trying to harm her, Grant said. They're trying to own her. The way they own anything valuable. They keep her located. They keep her accessible. So that anytime they need something from me, they have a hand on the thing that matters most. He felt Jolene looking at him. He didn't turn. I need a location that doesn't exist in any framework they have access to, Grant said. Not a property I hold. Not anything connected to the organization. Something completely outside. That's going to take time, his director said. I have maybe 2 hours before they establish a new search grid, Grant said. The call ended. He drove in silence. I heard all of that, Jolene said. I know. They want to use me, yes. As a way to control you. Yes. She looked out the window. Malcolm really thought this through, she said. It wasn't admiration. It was the flat recognition of someone acknowledging the quality of the trap they're sitting in. He thought it through, Grant said. He just didn't account for them, deciding his usefulness was over. And called her. Grant didn't answer. 19 years, Jolene said. Yes. Did you know? Even partially no, Grant said. She nodded. They drove. He called Vera at 5:15. She answered in 2 rings again. I need a location, he said. Completely off record. Nothing connected to me, the organization, or any property I hold. A pause. How urgent, she said. She's in the car with me right now. Another pause, shorter. Drive to Thunderbolt, Vera said. There's a marina. Slip 47. The boat is registered to a holding company I maintain for client use. Nobody connects it to me, and nobody connects me to you in that context. She paused. It's not comfortable. It doesn't need to be comfortable, Grant said. It needs to be warm, Jolene said from the passenger seat. Loudly enough for the phone to pick up. A brief pause from Vera. There's heating, Vera said. I'll call the harbor master. Grant drove toward Thunderbolt. The sky was beginning to lighten on the eastern edge, that first gray suggestion of day that happened before any actual color appeared. The road was empty. Jolene had her hands in her lap and her eyes on the road ahead. Are you okay? Grant said. I'm 7 months pregnant, and I've moved 3 times tonight, Jolene said. Define okay, Fair, Grant said. I need to stop, she said. In about 10 minutes, somewhere with a bathroom. He pulled into an all-night gas station on the edge of the city. He waited in the car. He was watching the road behind them, the mirrors, the angles, the shapes of any vehicle that might have followed when his director called back. I found something, his director said, about the Baltic contact. The man who called you, go ahead. He's not network, the director said. Not exactly. He's independent. He brokered for them, but he's not part of their structure. He's been under federal watch for 18 months import-export. Nothing confirmed, but the Bureau has an open file. Grant looked at the gas station door. Federal, he said. Active file, his director confirmed, meaning they're looking for a reason to move. Meaning if someone handed them documentation of his network's domestic operations. It becomes their problem, Grant said. It becomes their problem, his director said. And Malcolm's domestic coordination becomes evidence in a federal case, which removes it from the civil arena entirely and makes the conservatorship filing the least of Malcolm's concerns. Grant sat with that. That's the move, he said. It requires giving the Bureau the financial records. His director said. Everything. The network correspondence, Rook's statement. All of it goes federal. And the organization, Grant said. Will be scrutinized, his director said. Carefully. We're not clean, Grant, you know that. Handing this to the Bureau means they look at everything. How bad is it, Grant said. For us, manageable if we're cooperative and proactive. The Eastern Network and Malcolm's activity is the primary target. We're collateral, but we will be looked at. Jolene came back from the gas station. She got in the car. She looked at Grant's face. What? She said. I have a way to end this, he said. It involves giving federal investigators documentation that will create scrutiny of my own organization. She looked at him. And you're telling me this because, she said, because you deserve to know what kind of world the decisions I make are building, he said. You're carrying my daughter. You've been running from the consequences of choices made by men in my circle for 5 months. You have a right to know when I'm making another big one. Jolene looked at the dashboard. She was quiet for a moment. Does it end the danger, she said. Yes, all of it, Malcolm. The network, the address problem. All of it, Grant said. The federal case becomes the instrument. Everything gets absorbed into that. And your organization. Takes damage, he said. Survives if I manage it correctly. She looked at him. Then do it, she said. It's not your decision to make, Grant said. I know that, she said. I'm telling you my opinion. Do it. He drove toward Thunderbolt. The marina was quiet at that hour, the boat sitting motionless on dark water, the smell of salt and rope and engine oil that belonged to working harbors. Slip 47 held a modest cabin cruiser, nothing ostentatious, the kind of vessel that existed to be used rather than displayed. Jolene stepped aboard carefully. Grant held her arm and she accepted it without comment. Below deck it was tight but functional. 2 berths. A small galley. Heat that worked once Grant found the switch. Jolene sat on the berth nearest the hull and looked at the low ceiling and said nothing for a minute. Grant remained standing. I'll make the call, he said. The Bureau contact. It's going to move fast once I do. They'll want the documents within hours. Grant, Jolene said. He stopped. Sit down, she said, for 5 minutes. Sit down and stop moving. He sat on the opposite berth. The boat moved slightly under them. Small, rhythmic, the harbor's natural motion. They sat. When she's born, Jolene said quietly, the baby. What do you want to be called? Grant looked at her. The question arrived sideways, outside the frame of everything else, and his mind, which had been running at operational speed for 18 hours, stopped. What? He said her father. Jolene said, what do you want to be called? He looked at his hands. He had not thought about it. He had been thinking about the organization, and Malcolm and network correspondence, and federal contacts and safe houses, and he had not in all of that, sat with the fact that there was a specific person arriving in approximately 6 weeks who would look at him and need a word for what he was. Dad, he said. It came out more simply than he expected. Jolene nodded. Okay, is that? I asked, she said. Okay means okay. She lay back on the berth and closed her eyes. Grant sat on the opposite berth and listened to the water move against the hull. He made the call at 6:15. His federal contact was a woman named Aldridge, who had been useful to the Holloway organization in the past in the mutually manageable way that certain federal contacts were, which meant she understood that the information he brought her was real, and that his cooperation was genuine, and that the resulting scrutiny of his own organization was a price he was paying voluntarily. She was quiet for a long time after he laid it out. You understand what you're initiating, she said. Yes, Grant said. This is not something you walk back once it starts. Another pause said. Send me everything, she said. I'll have a team briefed by noon. He sent the files. He set the phone down on the galley counter. Through the small porthole above the berth, the sky had turned from gray to the early pale yellow of a savannah morning. He could hear Jolene breathing in the steady way of someone who had finally fallen asleep, and the harbor outside making its small water sounds, and somewhere distant, a boat engine starting. He had just handed the federal government a case that would take apart the structure Malcolm had built and expose the Eastern network and scrutinize his own organization, and effectively end the version of the Holloway operation that had existed for 30 years. He had done it sitting in the galley of a borrowed boat with the documents sent from his phone. No ceremony, no strategy session, no table of senior members. Just a decision. He thought about Malcolm standing at the head of that warehouse table, expecting the room to turn toward him, and the moment when it hadn't. He thought about Calder driving west on I-16, with whatever he was carrying and wherever he thought he was going. He thought about a woman in the next room who had been managing the consequences of this family for 5 months on her own, and had looked at him tonight and said, do it without asking what it would cost her. His phone vibrated, his director. 2 vehicles, the director said. They came back to the Calhoun address. Then they moved to the Whitaker Street property. Then they stopped. Why did they stop? Grant said. Because 3 black SUVs just pulled up behind them, the director said. And there was something in his voice that was not quite relief and not quite disbelief, but somewhere between the two. Federal plates. Aldridge had moved faster than noon. Grant looked at the porthole. The pale yellow had deepened. What's happening? His director said. The problem is being handled, Grant said. Get everyone in-house. Full review of operational records. I want documentation of every cooperative action we've taken, with the investigation ready by this afternoon. You already spoke to them, his director said. An hour ago, Grant said. A long pause. How bad is it going to be? His director asked. For us? Grant said. We'll survive it. Keep everyone calm and cooperative and document everything. He ended the call. He sat in the galley of the boat, with the morning coming through the porthole, and his hands loose in his lap, and he thought about what Jolene had said. The strategy right now is reactive. He had finally made a proactive move. It had cost him 30 years of organizational structure and exposed everything he ran to federal scrutiny and would take years to rebuild in a form that was cleaner than what it replaced. He thought it was probably the right call. He wasn't entirely sure. That uncertainty felt more honest than certainty would have. His shoulder ached the old injury from a car door, which had never fully resolved and which manifested in the specific way of old injuries, not sharp, just a persistent low reminder of something that had happened and left a mark. He pressed his hand against it. Outside, a gull landed on the dock railing and sat for a moment and then was gone. He heard Jolene shift on the berth, a sharp intake of breath. Then nothing. Then very clearly, in a voice that had been stripped of everything except the immediate fact of what was happening, Grant. He was on his feet before the word finished. He was through the galley door. Jolene was sitting up on the berth, with one hand pressed to her side, and her face carrying an expression he had never seen on her before, not fear, not panic, but a focused, startled attention. Like someone who has just received information, they were not expecting this early, and are rapidly adjusting their understanding of the schedule. How far apart? He said. I don't know, she said. This is the first one. But she stopped. Something crossed her face. Grant, she's early. 6 weeks, he said. I know how many weeks, she said. sharp with effort. I'm telling you she's coming now. He looked at her. He had managed federal cooperation, 2 safe houses, a harbor extraction, a conservatorship counterfiling, and an organizational restructuring in the last 12 hours. His mind went completely blank for 3 full seconds. Then it came back online. Can you walk? He said. Yes, she said. The hospital is 12 minutes, he said. I'll have someone meet us there. Just drive, she said. He helped her up. She gripped his arm with a strength that told him this was real and moving fast, and that the next several hours were going to be the most important of his life for reasons that had nothing to do with organizations or networks or legal filings. He got her off the boat. He got her to the car. He drove. His hands on the wheel were not steady, and he did not try to make them steady, because steadiness right now was not the point, and he was done. Pretending composure was the same thing as being present. Jolene breathed beside him. He drove faster than careful. Behind them, Savannah came fully into morning, the light gold and flat over the river, the streets beginning to fill, the city resuming its ordinary business with no particular awareness that anything had just shifted on its axis. He got her to the hospital in 9 minutes. He got her through the door. He told the desk what was happening and watched the staff move and felt, for the first time in his adult life, completely and usefully powerless, not the powerlessness of defeat, but the powerlessness of a man who has done everything he can do and now has to stand to the side and let something happen that is larger than anything he knows how to manage. A nurse took Jolene's arm. Jolene looked back at Grant over her shoulder. Don't disappear, she said. I'm right here, he said. She went through the door. He stood in the hallway. His shoulder ached. His hands would not entirely stop moving. He pressed them flat against his thighs and stood in the fluorescent corridor of a Savannah hospital. While somewhere behind a set of swinging doors, the most important thing in his life was happening without him. And he waited. Because waiting was what was required of him now. And for the first time in a very long time, what was required of him was something he was willing to give. He stood in that corridor for 4 hours and 11 minutes. He knew the exact duration because he watched the clock on the wall across from the waiting area. An institutional clock, white face, black numbers, the kind that moves in visible increments rather than sweeping continuously, so that every minute announced itself with a small mechanical click that he felt in his back teeth by the 3rd hour. He did not sit. He had tried twice. The chairs were the molded plastic kind that existed in every hospital in the country, designed for function rather than comfort. And every time he sat down, he found himself standing again within minutes because sitting felt like a form of abandonment that his body refused to cooperate with. He called his director once, at the 2-hour mark, to confirm that the federal sweep was proceeding and that the organization's cooperative posture was holding. The conversation lasted 4 minutes. He retained almost none of it. A nurse came out at the 3-hour mark and told him it was going well and that these things took time and asked if he needed anything. He said no. She looked at his face and said, she's strong. I can tell you that much. He said, I know. The nurse went back through the doors. He stood at the window at the end of the corridor and watched Savannah come fully into morning. Below him, the streets filling, the light settling gold and flat across the rooftops, the city arranging itself into its ordinary Tuesday shape without any awareness that something was happening on the 4th floor that would rearrange the internal geography of at least 2 lives permanently. He thought about Dawn. The name had come to him sometime around the 2nd hour. From nowhere he could locate just a word that arrived and settled and felt right in a way he couldn't explain and didn't try to. He hadn't said it aloud. It wasn't his to say, but he held it. At 4 hours and 11 minutes, the door opened and a different nurse looked at him and said, Mr. Holloway. He crossed the corridor in 4 steps. She was small. That was the first thing. He had understood intellectually that newborns were small. He had not understood it as a physical fact until the nurse placed her in his arms, and the weight of her registered not light exactly, but compact. Dense in the way of things that contain a great deal in a small space, and he looked down at her face. She was red and creased, and her eyes were closed, and her hands were curled against her chest, with the particular unconscious fist of someone who has spent months in a position that no longer applies and hasn't yet received the message. She was the most complete thing he had ever held. He was aware distantly that his hands were not steady. He was aware that the nurse had said something he hadn't processed. He was aware that Jolene was watching him from the bed, with an exhaustion so profound it had passed through the far side of itself and become something quieter. He looked at Jolene. She looked at him. Neither of them said anything for a moment. Then Jolene said very quietly, "Your hands have two choices now." He looked at her. "Hold power," she said. "Or hold her." She paused. "You can't pretend you hold both the same way." Grant looked down at the baby in his arms. His daughter. Whatever he had been building for 20 years, the structures, the relationships, the accumulated authority, none of it had prepared him for the specific weight of this. The specific irreversibility of it. "Dawn," he said. Jolene looked at him. "If you want," he said, "I don't." "Dawn," Jolene said. She tested it, looked at the window where the morning light was coming in gold and early. She was born at daybreak. "Yes," Grant said. Jolene looked at her daughter. "Dawn," she said again. And this time it wasn't a test. It was a name. The consequences arrived in the days that followed, not all at once, but in the particular sequence of institutional processes that have their own pace and cannot be hurried. Dr. Silas Rook's sworn statement, combined with the financial transfer records and the hospital's confirmation of non-admission, was submitted to the state medical board within 72 hours of Dawn's birth. The board moved faster than Grant expected, which suggested they had been looking for cause for some time and were not unhappy to have it handed to them. Rook's medical license was suspended pending a full review. He retained an attorney. The attorney was good. The license was revoked anyway. Rook left Savannah 3 weeks later. Grant did not know where he went and did not ask. Father Elias presented his own situation differently. He did not wait for someone to come to him. He went instead to his own superiors and made a full accounting of his involvement, the document witnessing, the silence, the presence at Bertie's house when the papers were signed. Grant learned of this secondhand through Vera, who had heard it through channels that ran adjacent to the formal legal process. Elias did not contact Grant. Grant did not contact Elias. There was nothing between them that required direct resolution. Elias had made his accounting to the structure he answered to. That was sufficient. The federal case moved on its own timeline, which was longer and more complex than Grant had anticipated and shorter than Vera had warned him it might be. The Eastern Network's domestic operations were the primary target, and the documentation Grant had provided gave the Bureau a road map that was thorough enough to keep them occupied for the better part of a year. The network's principals were not arrested immediately. Federal cases rarely worked that fast, but their operational capacity in the Southeast was effectively dismantled within months as the Bureau worked through the ledger. The Baltic Voice, the man who had called Grant before dawn on that last long night, was identified in the federal paperwork as a person of interest. He was not charged. He was apparently cooperative. Grant did not follow the details of his specific outcome and found he didn't particularly want to. The Holloway organization was scrutinized thoroughly and without sympathy. Vera managed the process with the particular skill of someone who had spent decades in the space between legal frameworks and knew exactly how to present cooperation as the operative posture without making it look like capitulation. They lost 2 distribution relationships permanently. 3 operational structures were dissolved. A significant portion of the Eastern Corridor business was surrendered. What remained was smaller and cleaner and could be looked at directly without the particular discomfort of things that exist partly in shadow. Grant found, to his own surprise, that he preferred it. Malcolm did not come back. He sent, through a third party, a message to Vera's office, not to Grant, directly indicating that he had no intention of contesting the federal cooperation or the organizational restructuring. The conservatorship filing was withdrawn. The Atlanta law firm returned its retainer. Malcolm settled somewhere. Grant was told was the Gulf Coast. He did not ask for specifics. The one thing Malcolm sent directly, 3 months after Dawn's birth, was a package addressed to Grant at the Drayton Street building. Inside was a photograph Grant's father, young, standing in front of the original Holloway building, on a summer day that must have been in the 70s based on the quality of the light and the cut of the clothes. On the back, in Malcolm's handwriting, he would have been proud of her. Grant sat with the photograph for a long time. Then he put it in the desk drawer. Not the second drawer, where the death certificate had been. The top drawer, where he kept things that mattered. He never sent a response. Calder Wynn did not come back to Savannah either. The federal investigation identified his role as a secondary information provider, a facilitator rather than a principal, and his cooperation, once contacted, was apparently substantial enough that the Bureau's interest in him was resolved without prosecution. Grant learned this from Vera. He sat with it for several days. What Calder had done was a betrayal of the most ordinary kind, not ideological, not personal, just the slow accumulation of financial inducement over 18 months from a man he had known for 30 years. Malcolm had known exactly how to approach him, had known what Calder valued and what Calder feared, and had applied pressure in exactly the right places. Grant had trusted Calder because Calder had always been there, and presence is easy to mistake for loyalty. He did not hate Calder for it. He was not sure that was generosity. It might have been exhaustion. He arranged for Calder's pension, 20 years of service, fully vested to be paid out through the organization's standard retirement process. No fanfare, no message attached. Calder died peacefully in a hospital bed 14 months later. His daughter notified the Drayton Street office, apparently uncertain whether they would want to know. Grant arranged the headstone. He chose the inscription himself, standing in a stonemason's workshop on a gray November afternoon, with the options in front of him and a woman behind the counter waiting patiently. He stood there for a while. Calder went a man of this house. It was true. It was complicated. Both things could be true. He paid for the stone and left. Bertie Vey died on a spring morning, 14 months after Dawn was born. She died on the front porch of the Blue Door house, in her chair, with a blanket across her lap and the morning sun coming through the oak trees at the angle she had always preferred. The neighbors all said she had been sitting there since early morning. Nobody knew exactly when she went. She simply was there, and then she was gone, with the expression of someone who had finished something and was satisfied with the finishing. Jolene had driven out that morning she drove now, her own car, a practical thing she had bought with her own money, and had found her. She had sat beside her for a long time. Grant arrived 40 minutes later when Jolene called him. He found her on the porch steps, not crying, sitting with her hands in her lap, and the morning going on around her the way it does. He sat on the step below her. She said she knew I was okay. He said yes. She needed to know that before she could, she stopped. Started again. She held on until she knew I was okay. Grant looked at the oak trees. She asked about Dawn once, Jolene said. Just once, she said. Does she have good hands? I told her yes. She said good. That was it. She didn't ask anything else. They sat on the porch steps until the morning was fully established around them, and then they went inside and began making the phone calls that needed to be made, and they did it together, practically and without ceremony, because that was what was required, and they had both gotten past, needing things to be more than what they were. The Blue Door house was sold 3 months later. Jolene kept the door. She had it installed on the back of her new house, which was neither temporary nor particularly large, but had a garden with real soil and a room for Dawn that got morning light through east-facing windows. Grant helped paint the room. He was not a skilled painter. He left visible lines at the corners and roller marks in 2 places and a drip along the baseboard near the door that he tried twice to fix and made worse both times. Jolene watched him make it worse the second time. Stop, she said. It's fine. It's crooked, he said. It's a room, she said. She's not going to care. He looked at the drip. He capped the paint. He stepped back and looked at the room, the yellow walls, the natural light, the slightly irregular line along the baseboard near the door, and thought it was the most honest room he had ever stood in. They did not marry. Grant asked once, about 8 months after Dawn's birth. In a manner that was not romantic so much as direct, he was sitting at Jolene's kitchen table, with his coffee going cold, and she was feeding Dawn in the chair by the window, and he said, I want to ask you something. She looked at him. Will you marry me, he said. She looked at Dawn. Then she looked at him. No, she said, it was not unkind. What's broken between us can't be fixed by a ceremony. It has to be fixed by showing up, every day, whether it's convenient or not. Grant looked at his coffee. So show up, she said. He nodded. He drove home that night to his own house. He kept his own house, maintained his own separate life, understood that this was part of the terms, and sat in his kitchen in the dark and thought about what she had said. Show up. Every day. It sounded simple. He had been learning for years that the simplest instructions were the ones that required the most from you. He showed up. Not perfectly. There were evenings he was late because something at the organization required him, and he chose the organization. And Jolene did not say anything about it, but her face did, and he saw it and carried it. There were mornings he arrived, and Dawn was already at Bertie's, the blue door, the familiar porch, and he had missed the particular morning routine that he had been looking forward to all week. There were arguments, real ones, about monies and decisions, and the specifics of how they were going to manage a child between two separate lives that had not been designed to accommodate each other. They were not easy arguments. They did not resolve cleanly. They resolved the way most things between adults who are genuinely trying resolve imperfectly, with residue, with the specific compromise of two people who respect each other enough to keep going even when keeping going is hard. Grant showed up. 6 years of it. 6 years of dinners at Jolene's kitchen table, with Dawn between them eating with the deliberate concentration of a small person learning that eating is a skill. 6 years of Grant arriving on Saturday mornings with groceries he had learned slowly to buy in the quantities that actually got used instead of the quantities that impressed. 6 years of Jolene's work spread across her sewing table. In the back room, she had rebuilt her business better than before, with a reputation that had grown steadily through the city for the quality and reliability of her craftsmanship. She employed 2 other seamstresses. She had turned down a partnership offer from a fashion house in Atlanta on the grounds that she wasn't interested in making clothes for people who already had everything. She continued to take in repairs from neighbors. 6 years of Grant learning, through accumulated daily evidence, the difference between providing for someone and being present for them. They were not the same thing. He had spent his entire adult life believing they were. The Holloway organization continued, smaller, cleaner, legitimate in ways it had not been before, because the federal process had effectively required legitimacy as the price of organizational survival. Grant ran it differently than Malcolm had, more transparent, more directly accountable to the people who worked within it, less comfortable with the arrangements that existed in the gray space between legal and not. It was less profitable in some quarters. He found he cared less about that than he had expected to. Vera remained his attorney. She was more expensive than she had been, which she explained by pointing out that her work had become genuinely more complex now that it needed to be actually legal. He appreciated her sense of humor. Sterling Langford withdrew from Savannah's financial community within a year of the broken engagement, the federal scrutiny having made his own exposure uncomfortable enough that retreat was preferable to remaining. Monica moved to Charleston. Grant heard she had remarried someone in architecture, apparently, which seemed to suit the version of herself she'd always been trying to build. He wished her well. He meant it. On Dawn's first day of school, Grant was at Jolene's house at 7:15 in the morning. He had not been asked to come. He had not asked if he should. He simply arrived, because this was a day that he was going to be present for, and the logistics of whether that was expected of him were beside the point. Jolene opened the door. She looked at him. Then she looked at the box in his hands, a small lunchbox, blue, with a pattern on it that Dawn had chosen herself at the store 3 days earlier, pointing at it with the absolute certainty of a 6-year-old who knows exactly what she wants. "You remembered," Jolene said. "I bought it," he said. "I was there when she picked it." "I know," Jolene said. "I'm saying you remembered to bring it." He handed it to her. Dawn appeared at the bottom of the stairs in her first day of school clothes, which she had also chosen herself, and which were not what Jolene would have chosen for her, but which Jolene had understood was not her decision to make. Dawn looked at Grant. "You're here," she said. "Yes," he said. "Good," she said. She turned back to look at her shoes, which she was still working out. "Will you help?" He went down on one knee and tied her left shoe and then her right one. She held his shoulder while he did it. He looked at her hands. Small brown, with the same quality Bertie had asked about good hands. "Steady." "Ready?" he said. "Ready," she said. They drove to the school, Grant driving Jolene in the passenger seat, Dawn in the back, with her backpack clutched against her chest, like it contained something important that needed to be protected. She talked the whole way about her teacher's name and the color of the classroom as described by a neighbor's choose her child, and whether she would be allowed to choose her own seat. Jolene answered. Grant listened. Dawn kept talking. He parked. They walked to the school gate, the 3 of them, not arranged into any particular formation, just walking together the way people walk, when they have spent enough time in proximity that the spacing is natural. The teacher was at the gate, greeting families. She looked at them and smiled and said to Dawn, "Good morning." "And is this your family?" Dawn looked at the teacher. Then she looked at her mother. Then she looked at Grant. 6 years old, with her backpack against her chest and her shoes tied correctly, standing at the gate of the first day of everything. She looked at Grant the way a person looks at something they have been forming an opinion about for a very long time and have finally reached a conclusion. "Yes, ma'am," she said. "He's my father." Grant stood at the gate. He did not move. He watched Dawn walk through it and fall into step beside the teacher and not look back, because 6-year-olds going into something new do not look back. They go forward. It is one of the things about them that is entirely correct. The gate was there. His daughter was on the other side of it. He stood on this side. His hand found the plain silver ring he had worn on his right hand for 3 years, no particular occasion, just a thing he had chosen. A circle of unembellished metal that meant nothing to anyone who looked at it and meant something he had never tried to articulate to himself. He turned it once. Then he stopped, not grief, not loss. Something it took him a moment to recognize because it had not been a frequent visitor in his life. Gratitude. Raw, specific, not attached to any particular cause or credit. Just gratitude for the fact of the morning and the gate, and the small person who had walked through it, and the woman standing beside him, who had opened a door at 3 in the morning for a man who was bleeding and had given him a pillow and a blanket and the first honest conversation of his adult life. He stood there until Dawn disappeared through the school's main door. Then he turned. Jolene was watching him. She had been watching him watch Dawn go. He did not know what his face looked like. He rarely did. Whatever it looked like, she let it be what it was. She said, "Come on. I'll make coffee before you drive back." He walked with her back to the car. The morning was full around them, the noise of other families, other children, the particular sensory density of a school morning in a city coming fully awake. He noticed all of it, registered it, the smell of someone's breakfast through an open window, the sound of a bicycle chain, the way the light came off the pavement in the particular angle of early September. He had spent 20 years in rooms designed to focus his attention on power and what it required. He did not miss it. He got in the car. Jolene got in. They drove back to her house. She made coffee. He sat at the kitchen table in the house with the blue door on the back and the yellow room with the crooked baseboard and the garden with actual soil, and he drank the coffee, and outside the morning continued to be whatever morning was, and he did not try to hold it or control it or structure it into something more manageable. He let it be. Some things are not meant to be possessed. Grant Holloway had spent half his life learning which things those were. The other half he was learning what to do instead. He finished his coffee. He washed the cup. He drove back to his organization, which was smaller than it had been and more honest than it had ever been, and he did the work that the day required, and in the evening he drove back. He did not stop doing that, not the next day, not the one after. Every day. That was all it was. That was all it needed to be. He drove back that evening to find Jolene at the sewing table in the back room. She worked with the same quality of attention she brought to everything, not hurried, not mechanical, but the focused steadiness of someone who has done a thing long enough that the skill has moved from the surface into the hands themselves. She was finishing a hem on a woman's coat, the kind of careful work that required concentration at the edges, and she did not look up when Grant came through the back door. He set a bag of groceries on the kitchen counter. She called from the back room, "Dawn's homework is on the table." She said, "It's done, but check the math." He looked at the kitchen table. A single sheet of paper. 6-year-old arithmetic. The numbers written with the particular assertiveness of a child who has decided that the size of her handwriting is a form of confidence. He checked the math. 3 of the 7 problems were wrong. He sat down at the table and waited. Jolene came out of the back room 20 minutes later, rolling her shoulders the way she did when she'd been bent over the table too long. She looked at Grant, then at the paper in front of him. "How many?" she said. 3, he said. She made a sound that was not quite a sigh and not quite a laugh. "She was very confident when she showed me," Jolene said. "She's always confident," Grant said. "It doesn't correlate with accuracy." "She gets that from somewhere," Jolene said. Grant looked at the paper. "I'll talk to her tomorrow," he said. "Don't make it a big thing," Jolene said. "She gets defensive when it's a big thing." "I know," he said. "I'll make it a small thing." Jolene moved to the kitchen and looked at the groceries on the counter. She began putting them away with the practiced efficiency of someone who has organized a kitchen to exact personal specifications and knows where everything goes without having to think about it. Grant watched her. The Mercer case settled, he said. She didn't turn around. Which one is Mercer? Commercial property dispute on the east side, he said. We've been managing the mediation for 3 months. Did it go well? Well enough, he said. It went honest. She looked back at him over her shoulder. He had started saying that went honest as a way of distinguishing outcomes that were clean from outcomes that were technically successful. It was a distinction that had not existed in his vocabulary 5 years ago. It existed now because he had found through repeated experience that the two categories were genuinely different, and that collapsing them created the kind of problems that took years to resolve. Jolene turned back to the groceries. Vera called me, she said. Grant looked at her back. About the documentation, Jolene continued. She said the final federal review closes next month. No additional findings. We're clear. The we landed in the room without either of them commenting on it. Good, Grant said. She also said you turned down the Hartwell partnership. Yes, Grant said. Jolene set the last item in the cabinet and turned around. She leaned against the counter with her arms folded, not in the way she did when she was closed off, but in the way she did when she was thinking. Why, she said. Hartwell runs clean, Grant said. The numbers are good, the structure is solid. But the model requires moving faster than I want to move right now, and partnering would mean expanding the operation in directions that would. He paused. It would make it bigger. I don't want it bigger. Jolene looked at him. You're turning down money, she said. I'm turning down a particular kind of growth, he said. There's a difference. 6 years ago, you would not have made that distinction, she said. No, he agreed. 6 years ago, I was wrong about a lot of things. She looked at him for a moment longer. Then she uncrossed her arms and moved to the stove. Stay for dinner, she said. It was not a question and not quite an invitation. It was the kind of statement that existed in the territory between the two, that they had developed over years of proximity, something assumed but not imposed, offered but not demanded. Yes, he said. Dawn came home from her second day of school with paint on her left sleeve and a detailed account of every significant event of the day that she delivered without pause, from the moment she came through the door until she sat down at the kitchen table, at which point she stopped, looked at Grant, and said, You're still here. I'm still here, he said. Good, she said. She looked at the homework paper on the table. Is that mine? 3 of the answers need to be looked at, Grant said. She looked at the paper. She looked at him. She had Jolene's eyes, that measuring quality, the sense that she was taking a reading before committing to a response. Which 3, she said. He slid the paper toward her. She pulled it in front of her and studied it with the same focused attention her mother brought to a difficult seam. Not defensive, not immediately resistant, actually looking. This one I think I just wrote the wrong number, she said, pointing to the 4th problem. I knew it was 8. Probably, Grant said. This one, she frowned. I don't know why I did that. Walk me through it, he said. She walked him through it. She had made a logical error in the middle of the calculation that compounded into the wrong answers, not a careless mistake, an actual misunderstanding of a particular step. They worked through it together at the table, Grant explaining not by correcting, but by asking questions, until she found the error herself. When she found it, she said "oh" in a tone that indicated genuine discovery rather than the performance of it. Okay, she said, that makes sense now. Good, he said. She looked at the 3rd wrong answer. I don't want to talk about this one tonight, she said. Grant looked at it. Tomorrow, he said. Tomorrow, she agreed. She gathered the paper and her pencil and went to her room to fix what she was willing to fix tonight, and Grant sat at the table and heard Jolene, from the kitchen, make a sound that might have been a suppressed laugh. She negotiated with you, Jolene said. She negotiated successfully, Grant said. I know, Jolene said. She does that. Grant looked at the table where the paper had been. She's going to be very difficult when she's older, he said. She's going to be very capable, Jolene said. There's a difference. He looked toward the kitchen. She was standing at the stove with her back to him, stirring something. That's almost exactly what I just said to you, he said. She did not turn around, but her shoulders moved in the way they moved when she was smiling and had decided not to let him see it. The following spring, Jolene's business moved to a proper studio space on a quiet street in the Starland district. It was not large. 2 rooms, a front room for client consultations and fittings, and a back room where the actual work happened, with proper lighting and a layout she had designed herself over 3 months of planning. She had the blue door from Bertie's house installed as the entrance, repainted now, but still recognizably what it had always been. She hired a 3rd seamstress that year. She was approached twice by boutiques interested in carrying her work. She declined both, on the grounds that she was not interested in volume. The explanation she gave Grant, sitting at her kitchen table on a Tuesday evening while Dawn slept and the house was quiet, was more specific than that. "I know what I make," she said. "I know what it costs and what it's worth and who I want to make it for." The moment you start scaling, you start making decisions for the scale instead of for the work. I watched my grandmother do alterations her whole life and never once compromise on the quality of what she put out. Because the moment she started cutting corners was the moment she stopped being a seamstress and the moment she started being something else. She said it without weight, without philosophy. Just the matter-of-fact tone of someone who has looked at a thing directly and knows what she sees. Grant sat with it. "I dismantled 2/3 of my organization for almost the same reason," he said. Jolene looked at him. "Almost," he agreed. "Mine involved federal investigators. Mine involved self-respect," she said. "Cheaper and faster." He laughed. "It happened more now than it used to. Not the performance of levity, not the managed social function of laughter in professional settings, but the actual involuntary response to something that struck him as genuinely, simply funny. He had not known, until relatively recently, that those were different things." Jolene watched him. She did that sometimes watched him laugh, with an expression that was not sentimental and not analytical, but something between the two, as if she were tracking the distance between who he was now and who he had been the first time she'd seen him. He caught her looking. "What?" he said. "Nothing," she said. "You were thinking something," he said. "I'm always thinking something," she said. "That's not news. Tell me this one," he said. She looked at her coffee cup. "I was thinking that you laughed differently than you used to," she said. He looked at her. "When I knew you before," she said carefully, "you laughed at things that were strategic. Things where laughing was the right response in the room. You knew exactly when to laugh, and you did it at exactly the right time." She paused. "Now you laugh when something is actually funny," he said. "Is that better?" "Yes," she said. Without hesitation, he looked at the table. "I spent a long time not knowing there was a difference," he said. "I know," she said. "I'm sorry it took Grant," she said. He stopped. "I know," she said again, quietly, finally, with the specific weight of a person who has been carrying a thing for a long time and has decided to set it down not because it doesn't matter, but because the carrying is finished. He looked at her. He did not say anything else. Neither did she. The quiet between them had its own quality now earned, specific, the quiet of 2 people who have said most of what needs saying and are comfortable with what remains unsaid. Outside, the spring evening was doing what spring evenings did, in Savannah warm and green-smelling, the city softening at the edges, the way it did in the good months, the light going slowly and the air staying kind for a while after. He drove home that night, through the city he had lived in his entire life. He knew every street, had moved through them his entire adult life with the proprietary familiarity of a man whose organization had shaped the way the city operated, in ways both visible and not. He knew which blocks had changed and which had stayed, which buildings held history he was part of, and which held history that had nothing to do with him. He drove without hurry. He thought about his father. He did this more now than he used to thought about the man rather than the legacy, the person rather than the position. He had a clearer picture of his father now than he had when the man was alive, which was the particular irony of losing someone, before you're old enough to ask the right questions. His father had built something, had believed in it, had entrusted it to people he loved and people he trusted, which was not always the same list, and had died before the distinction fully manifested. Grant had spent 20 years in trying to maintain what his father built. He was no longer sure that maintenance was the right frame. Some things needed to be rebuilt from their actual foundations rather than managed from the surface. The Holloway organization in its current form was something his father would have recognized in name and not entirely in character, and Grant had decided, slowly and without announcement, that this was acceptable, that the version of integrity his father had believed in could be honored through substance rather than form. He did not know if that was right. He thought it was closer to right than the alternative. He parked in his own driveway. His house was large and quiet in the way of houses where one person lives, who is often somewhere else. He had thought, in the early years after the engagement ended, that he should downsize, that the scale of the house was a relic of a life he no longer lived. He had not moved. Not from sentimentality, but from the practical recognition that the house served functions that a smaller one wouldn't, and that he was comfortable in it in the specific way of a person who has learned to distinguish between space and emptiness. The two were not the same. He went inside. He made himself a late drink, something simple, no ceremony, and stood at the kitchen window, looking out at the backyard, which had a garden he tended on weekends with more consistency than skill. He thought about Dawn's face at the school gate. "He's my father. 6 years old," said it like it was a settled fact, like it had never been in question. He thought about all the ways it could have gone differently. If he had been more present when Jolene first needed him to be, none of the rest would have been necessary. The death certificate, the 5 months, the safe houses, the network, the federal case, the long, slow work of showing up. He could build a complete list of the decisions that had made all of it necessary. His decisions, not Malcolm's, not Calder's. He had made that list. He had looked at it carefully. He had decided that the list was important to know and not useful to carry continuously. That there was a difference between accountability and self-punishment, and that the second one served nobody. He finished the drink. He washed the glass. He thought, tomorrow is Saturday. Dawn had swimming in the morning. He was picking her up after. They were going to the market on Farm Street, the same market where he had found Jolene 3 years before she forgave him. And Dawn had been promised she could choose what they were going to cook for dinner. She had been planning the menu since Wednesday. He had already been warned it would involve something complicated. He went to bed. He slept. Saturday morning arrived the way Saturday mornings did when you had somewhere to be that you actually wanted to be faster than weekdays, with a different quality of light, as if the city itself knew the pace had changed. He arrived at the pool as the lesson was ending. Dawn came out of the changing room with wet hair and her backpack and the particular satisfied energy of a child who has successfully done something physical. She saw him at the door and walked toward him with the unhurried confidence of a person who has never doubted he would be there. He held the door. She went through it. They walked to the car. "I went all the way across the deep end," she said. "The whole width?" he said. Without stopping, she said. "Mrs. Adler said I was ready for the next level. Are you?" he said. She considered this seriously. "Probably," she said. He opened the car door for her. She got in. He got in. They drove to Farm Street. The market was busy in the good way of Saturday markets, full without being crowded. The kind of organized abundance that meant there was something worth finding in every direction. Dawn moved through it with the methodical determination of someone executing a specific plan. She had a list in her head, had had it since Wednesday, and she was going to execute it. Grant followed. He carried the bags. She made decisions with the absolute seriousness of someone for whom this task is genuinely important, which it was. She examined vegetables with the same quality of attention her mother brought to fabric. She asked one vendor 3 questions about the tomatoes before selecting the ones she wanted. The vendor answered all 3 questions with complete gravity. Grant watched. He thought, she is going to be fine. Not because the world would be easy for her. It would not. Not because she would not encounter damage and difficulty and the specific cruelty that the world applies to people who are too honest and too capable and too unwilling to be managed. She would encounter all of it. She was going to be fine because she had her mother's eyes and her mother's hands, and the particular quality of attention that meant she looked at things as they actually were rather than as it was convenient for them to be. That quality was the most important thing a person could have. He had not had it at her age. He was not sure he had fully developed it at his own age. But she had it already, at 6, standing in a Savannah market on a Saturday morning, interrogating a tomato vendor with complete confidence. He was intensely, specifically grateful. Dawn selected the tomatoes. She moved to the next stall. Grant followed with the bags. The morning went on around them, the market noise, the smell of fresh produce, and the river underneath it. The particular warmth of a Savannah springstorm that promised summer without quite delivering it yet. His daughter was 3 feet ahead of him, moving toward whatever she had decided she needed next, with no uncertainty about where she was going. He kept pace, he always would. That was the whole of it in the end. Not the organization, or the authority, or the 20 years of structures built to demonstrate that he was a man of consequence. Just this. A daughter 3 feet ahead and a man who had learned, later than he should have and not too late, that following the people who matter is not a diminishment. It is the only kind of leading that means anything at all.